You've heard two presentations so far from the National Cooperative Highway Research Program, how they'd like to take things into practice. You've heard from the Corps of Engineers how they'd like to take things into practice. And we've had some great leaders here from DOTs, from the MaineDOT and from the MassDOT chief engineers. They're also with us to talk about how do we take research to practice, how do we do that effectively. So I'd like to ask the next panelist who can join us at the table. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our next panelists. You just heard, of course, from Dr. Robert Moser, from the Corps of Engineers. Our second panelist here is Joyce Taylor. She's chief engineer for the MaineDOT and a true leader who's spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to implement technology into practice. And she's very passionate about doing that as well, and has been working with us at the university for a very long time. And our third panelist is Carrie Lavallee. Carrie Lavallee is also chief engineer at the Massachusetts DOT, but also deputy administrator of the DOT. Again, another tremendous leader who's very quickly went up through the ranks from managing projects to now managing engineering and design at the DOT. It's a true honor to have both of you here from the DOTs with us today. And yesterday, many of you have heard from Sid Mohan. He's the associate program manager at the National Cooperative Research and Highway Program at National Academy of Sciences. And he also gave us yesterday 8 points where we can take research to practice. So we've got some great speakers, great panelists here today, really to help us figure out how to get there. And the goal here, what we'd like to come up with here is how do we all work together to try to take these research ideas and put them into practice and help drive costs down and enhance the durability of infrastructure. You've heard about a lot of barriers. So I'm going to take just a minute to ask each panelist to just introduce themselves and tell us about their general thoughts. And then we're going to go ahead and take questions from the audience to the panelists as well. So this is going to be very interactive. So I'm going to give the panelists a chance to spend a few minutes talking about themselves first and how they view their work and how they view bringing new technology and research results into practice. So you've heard from Dr. Moser. Dr. Moser, would you like to say any more? Pass?
I've had my salvo. I'm good.
Okay, that sounds real good. And we'll go ahead and go to Joyce Taylor.
Okay, is that working? Okay, great. So yes, I am the chief engineer at MaineDOT. I never aspired to be in that position. I'm quite surprised to this day that I'm there sometimes. But I am fortunate in that the research office works directly for me, which I really, whoops, is it, you can't hear me? No? I think you turned it off. Yeah, okay, thank you, thanks. That one's not on, sorry. So the research office works for me. And, I think research has changed a little bit in that we need to go a little bit faster sometimes because people's tolerance isn't long in terms of solving problems. But one thing I've learned as the chief engineer is a lot of people have a lot of opinions. And a lot of people, I'm convinced that everyone thinks they're a traffic engineer, convinced of that. But it is our job, I think Carrie would agree, we have to make decisions based on facts. And it's really important that the research follows the kinds of problems we're trying to solve. But I need facts. I don't want to just make decisions based on opinions and feelings, because a lot of what we do, other people have their opinions about what to do. So to me, research is really critical in terms of our decision making and trying to understand, how we solve very difficult problems, which in today's world, I would add, climate for us is becoming a huge issue. I know you guys had issues yesterday. We had some issues. We really need to figure it out because the transportation system is the EMS pathway to help people out when they're in crisis. So that's a huge issue. And I think, equity in the transportation system is really critical. We need to also figure out how to help people be able to get to where they need to go. And I think COVID shined a light on that. But facts, making decisions factual based is really important.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joyce. And we'll go right now to Carrie.
So what's kind of unique, the way we have it set up at MassDOT is that everyone, well, maybe it's not unique, but everybody has an opportunity to kind of submit a research project. And then I have the opportunity to review everybody's research projects and figure out which ones we're going to fund. And we really do get a variety, which I have found what has been the most successful is that we do have like short-term research projects, which really will get kind of the feedback we want. We work closely with our research and materials lab, and they do a lot of very specific, like concrete material mixes. And then we can quickly kind of turn that around once the research is done to put that into a spec. And then we have the broader ones, which is more like, how are we going to use LiDAR and how are we going to gather that information? And so I feel like what we've really tried to do, at least in our, since I've been in this role, is kind of balance that. So when we do the research, we want to have some of those short-term goals that we can kind of hit and show and demonstrate that the research is a benefit and quickly show everyone why. And then we want to have those long-term projects that may take a couple of phases, may even expand in that you have one idea and then you realize you need to do more research. And so we kind of try and balance it between the two. And I can't emphasize enough what Dr. Moser was saying about collaboration. We work very closely with a couple of universities in Massachusetts, and I feel like that's really provided us with a lot of success as well.
Great.
And I also did not expect to be chief engineer. I don't know if people expect to have that kind of role, but you know, thank you. So,
Well, thank you, Carrie. Very, very important points. We can move on to you, Sid, here. And I know you've talked yesterday. Many of you may not have heard you yesterday. So please go ahead.
Well, it's good to be back, and it's surprising what 8 hours of sleep can do for a person. I'm actually slightly different from a lot of folks in this room, as in I've worked in different sectors. My job previous to my current job, I was in agricultural research in sub-Saharan Africa. And one of the things that we learned rather early was there's really no such thing as bad research when you think about it, right? It may not have the kind of impacts that you thought that it was going to have. It may not have the kind of financial outcomes that he thought it was going to have, but it will have value at some point. You can learn from research no matter how bad you may think it is. And an extension of that is also, there really aren't any bad ideas. You could always say that, well, no, that's not going to work out, so maybe that's not something we need to pursue in the future. So something I always like to tell my fellow researchers is, keep that thinking going, think big, think broad. Eventually, when it does reach their desks, you may need to be a little bit more, on the point. And as Joyce and Carrie mentioned, show them the value. But at least initially, there's no such thing as a bad idea or bad research. So.
Thank you very much, Sid. And we're going to take some questions from the audience. If you have questions, please come up to one of the mics so we can hear you. But before we do that, I'd just like to ask you on the panel here, and you can answer in any random order you want. Give us an example maybe of one research project that you're involved in that really made a big difference and you're using right now in practice. Okay, one particular research example where, wow, that thing really made a difference.
I think working with University of Maine on the composite beams, Habib knows that took time to get that to be something that our designers wanted to use. And, I tell the other chief engineers when Carrie and I go to our ASHTO meeting that I don't have to make them use it. They do it because they want to. And I think, it took a lot of pulling and pushing, right, that slide. But now that technology is something that we really like. We think it has a great longevity. We think it could solve some of our problems. As Habib said, if I can get another 10 years life out of a bridge, that is a huge win for us. And so, to me, having been involved from the beginning, the very beginning, to see the fact that our folks actually want to use that technology that was developed through research is great. I would just add, I think getting our people involved so that it was at that collaboration helped that, because if it had just been here, you need to use it, they would have used it. I mean, honestly, if I tell them you must do this, they're probably not going to do it. I mean, if they don't want to, no one likes that, right? No one likes being told you must do something. But I think that's the one I would name.
Thank you, Joyce. Yeah, Carrie.
So I actually cheated and I asked my staff some of the ones that they thought were most successful because some of our projects are still ongoing. So I actually took notes out of this meeting, not actually having any idea what the question would be. But the one that I got was characterization of reclaimed asphalt pavement, which as a result of that one, we're using a lot higher wrap on all of ours. We do 25 to 35%, which previously I guess was at 15%. So for us, that's been a huge change from the standard that we were using before. And that was something we can directly demonstrate to people. And then the other one that I got was traffic. Was really excited because we did a lot of testing on the flashing yellow permissible left turn signal. We had a lot of success in it. We actually saw safety improvements, and now we are installing it and we're getting a lot less pushback, similar to kind of what you were saying, Joyce, that previously people didn't really see the benefit of it. It was very confusing. And then when we put it out there, we got really positive safety improvements.
Fantastic, Carrie. Really, two really good examples. Anyone would like to go next?
I could say a few examples, but one I think is pretty tangible. So in the civil works portfolio, one of the research efforts that we recently completed and didn't actually field a widget or a new technology, but it was knowledge that totally changed the course of action on a maintenance decision. And so this is part of our structural health monitoring program. We have these massive inland navigation lock structures that take the barges and ships up and down the rivers. And they have large steel structures that have anchorages that were built. I mean, these things are some of them are over 100 years old that go back and they anchor into concrete, and they're made out of vintage steels that we don't know the properties of. And there's just all this uncertainty. We had a couple of failures in those that shut down the projects to navigation, which is a big deal. And so there was uncertainty in how to do that, how to do a major rehabilitation of all those projects, which we estimated just for the Ohio River would be on the order of about $400 million. And so they asked us, could you do research, kind of like the load rating thing that we talked about earlier? Could you do research to help us much better understand these materials, how fatigue happens, how load is redistributed from the anchor into the structure and the foundation? And so we did a series of finite element models. We pulled samples out of structures that were being rehabilitated to understand fatigue. We did structural scale simulations to validate our models. And found out we didn't really need to do about 95% of the stuff that we thought we needed to do. And that saved in direct cost on those projects about $400 million. And then when we actually did the estimates on the way we were going to do those repairs, because they were not major shutdowns of the projects that required major rehabilitation, there's a value side of the coin too. So we saved money, but we also saved the shutdown of projects for the navigation industry. And so the economic impact of that was also I think our ROI on research investments in the navigation sector is about 20 to 1. And so the amount of money and the time that we save on that had estimated billions of dollars of benefits as far as keeping those projects operating for the economy. So that was like a $250K effort. Small research effort that buys down risk and uncertainty and yields value.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's a great example here. Yeah.
So we're not a implementing organization. We manage research on behalf of our partners, which are primarily state DOTs, but also the feds and ASCC. However, because we're in New England, I guess the New England example would be rather good. And I mentioned this briefly yesterday during my presentation. We did a training session for folks from several New England states in Vermont on UAS operations a few years ago. And a few months ago, during the unfortunate flooding that happened in Vermont, they were able to use the skills that they learned from that training to do some monitoring and to assess damage and for other things. For us, that was a rather special win because this was something that we funded. We got to see some real world impacts, and despite all the unfortunate scenes there, at least we were able to play a little role in terms of trying to mitigate that and to figure out the way forward. We have several examples of this, but that one was particularly special given all of the destruction that happened in this area.
Great, thank you. We've heard four really fantastic examples of return on investment, if you wish, for research and development. And I'd just like to invite you all to come and ask questions, if you wish to. Yes, John?
So you talk about it's complicated. And there's a lot of factors, there's a lot of variables. But I'm curious from each of the panelists, is there probably one key to success that you would think is suitable for each of the organizations? Because we've got diversity on the panel, and obviously I don't think there's a silver thread that goes through all of that that has the key to success. But I'm curious, is there a single key that is probably better than most others as far as enabling it? Because everybody wants to accelerate a good idea into practice, especially from the composites industry. You know, everybody thinks they have the best widget, which is good, but there's a process. So I like the comment about facts. That's so true, but I'm just curious, is there a single key?
Well, thank you, John. So what's the Holy Grail?
So I talked about policy. We want to have policy that enables us to do that. But I would agree, you can push policy down and it doesn't mean people are going to do it, or they'll be so resistant to do it that it's not worth it, right? So you need buy-in. You need a culture, I think, that facilitates buy-in, right? Like we know in the DoD, we need to innovate on the military side to win, and we need to innovate on the civil side to have a good economy and be resilient. That's good long-term goals, but in the near term, people are resistant to innovation because it upsets their business model and everybody's too busy, right? So we need a culture that thinks about innovation and wants to do new things. I think if there's one thing I've seen that would helps to facilitate things very broadly is have somebody who is a champion and understands the workflow of almost everything. They don't need to be a physicist that understands the details of how your sensor works, but they need to understand the requirement. They need to understand how it works, how it needs to perform, and who's going to own it, right? We have some cases that's a researcher, right? But some people I've come to the conclusion are just not programmed to do that. But you need somebody in your cadre that can be that champion and build the relationships and understand how to be the translator between all of these different requirements. And hopefully that person has some authority. So that's, I don't know, my only opening thought.
Good point.
I think the culture of innovation is really important. And one of the ways to create it is, to allow people to fail. And I think people need to know that if they fail, it's okay. And you're only going to get the really good ideas if people are willing to come forward with them. So I think creating that environment where there's an open door policy of listening to those ideas and treating them with respect is really important. And I think leadership has to be respectful of those ideas from like our employees or people who have these ideas, because I've been around long enough that things that I would have thought would never work. I mean, I've seen things work that, 20 years ago, I wouldn't believe would work. And so I find, at this point in my career, I'm actually a lot more open-minded to things because I've just seen so much work out that I wasn't sure would. So I think the culture is really, really critical, and it really does start with leadership.
Thank you.
So apparently I should have gone first because they kind of took my answer, but to just go off of that, I do agree that you need it from the top down and from the bottom up, right? You need the staff to be supportive of the ideas and be open to being innovative, but you also need the administration, whatever your administration is, to be in favor of innovation so that they feel supported at the bottom, that they can come up with these ideas, and for them, again, to know that it's okay to fail, because in the end, overall, we're just trying to get to innovative ideas and innovative solutions, and we're not always going to hit it right out of the park every time. But again, I would emphasize, at least for me in our administration, is that I've had the support from the highway administrator and I've had the support from our secretary's office. And being able to express that down to people gives them the confidence that these ideas are worthwhile for them to pursue. I think without that, well, one, you don't get money, which is also important for research, but you need the everyone to really feel that the goals of innovation to be there. And again, you really need to explain to them, to give them a perspective that at the end of the day, you're not always going to get a solution. Sometimes you're just going to get more research out of it, and that's okay, because I think down the road you'll be innovative. So I think it's really explaining the goals of innovation to the administration above and just really expressing the support back down to the staff below.
Fantastic. Thank you, Carrie.
The key to success, unlimited funding. That would be a nice one. Sorry. That was a very flippant answer, and I'm only half serious when I say that. But in the absence of unlimited funding, I guess, and to build off the other responses, collaboration is one of the things that we are particularly keen on, not just within your organization, but also with folks on the outside, folks who may be the recipients of whatever it is you are developing, or the ultimate beneficiaries of whatever it is you're developing. It's there's a lot being produced these days. There's a lot of knowledge being produced these days. There's a lot of ideas. There's just so much information, and it's getting harder and harder to cut through all of that to, to find what you're looking for. So the more you collaborate, I guess, the better it is to get that message out there and to set yourself apart. But in lieu of that, unlimited funding again. So.
Thank you. No, nobody can argue that one, right? We have another question.
Yeah. Rebecca Brown, University of Rhode Island. I'm actually a horticulturist. I work on roadside vegetation. And this sort of plays off the last question. I've noticed with DOTs, but this is probably a problem in other organizations as well, that you have the leadership and the planning people and the idea people, and then you have the people who have to do the implementation, whether it's the maintenance division or whether it's the contractors that are hired. And my question is, how do we move change in the people who do the implementation when they may see the change either as too much trouble or as an additional cost because they have to retool to meet the new specs, or as a threat to their jobs? Especially if there's a way for them to get around actually having to follow the spec. I see some of the things I've been working on where we've been pushing stuff for 30, 40 years. It's in the spec, but it doesn't get followed. How do we move the needle on that? Thanks.
Wow, that's a loaded question. Who would like to take it?
So in my experience, our landscape architects have very similar comments. It might be a more specific issue for landscape itself in DOTs where there is a benefit. What we've seen is, I would go back to collaboration, where we've had our landscape team and our environmental team work very closely together on a lot of these. And then what we do is a lot of our projects will reach out to the design consultants, ASCC, as well as SIM, which is Construction Industries in Massachusetts, to try and get their buy-in during the process so that we're not just putting a spec out. They've seen it first, right? Like they've seen, and then we kind of explain to them what the goal of it is, not just this is the new spec, we're going to do it. It's here's some training, here's some knowledge. We do as much outreach as we can, and to kind of say this is the end goal of why we're doing this, so that they can better understand why to not ignore it. But I will say historically, my landscape architect team will say that people plant trees at the wrong time quite often. So I don't know if that's and seeding is done incorrectly in wetland delineation areas. I understand this is an ongoing issue, but specifically it's collaboration, I would say, and getting the right people in the room early and often and doing that training as well.
That sounds great. Thank you. Did you want to take another question or somebody else wants to add to that? There's another question. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Joe Fox from FX Consulting, and this is a question for everyone but Sid. Sorry, Sid. Have any of you been able to access and use money from the infrastructure bill?
Oh, yes, 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 yep, yep. We are going after grants like there's no tomorrow, and we've been fairly successful.
Excellent.
So, and our capital plan last year was $1.8 billion because we were able to get some redistribution money as well as other infrastructure money. So I would say Massachusetts has been successful.
Fantastic.
So I live in R&D world. I know that we've gotten a lot of funding through the infrastructure bill for kind of shovel-ready projects that have been on the shelf for decades. I mean, and not had funding. So across our districts around the country, there's a lot of projects going in the ground and major rehabilitation projects through the infrastructure bill. We've also seen some investments, and John will maybe be happy about this, through the infrastructure bill, looking at in future resilient infrastructure projects, how we can better utilize new technology. So one of the challenges we have is we study and design those projects and we wait to get funding from the Congress for a long time. And they sit on the shelf. And by the time they come around, technology may have changed. And so one of the other investment areas is, can we go back and look historically at all these projects that are relatively shovel ready, but we need to modernize them so they can hit the ground running. So that's another area we're doing with new materials, new specs, all these things. And that was supported through the infrastructure bill.
Thank you.
I would just add one thing. It's an interesting time with this infrastructure funding because there's a huge climate focus on a lot of the funding. And, you know, we're in this transition with a lot of funding for EV charging. And here in Maine, you know, we have about 10,000 EVs registered. And so we have huge goals. So it's one of these times where we're going to have to bring folks along who maybe don't believe in the technology, who aren't there yet. So there are things within the bill that's going to be kind of new for a lot of people. So I think we're really in a transition time with the amount of money that we're getting to really focus on climate in particular. So I think we need to help bring the public along with this when they start seeing some of what we're spending money on, because they don't always understand why we're doing it or agree with it.
And I will say this, yeah, despite being told not to answer this question. We can't get money directly from them, but we have seen an uptake in research funding that's come to us. The other thing that we've seen is, as Joyce was mentioning, you know, so there's topics there that probably require a little bit more research, a little bit more understanding, and that's where we come in and play a role. We're seeing some new research topics that we hadn't seen in the past coming from DOTs, and we're really hoping to make a difference with that. So while we were not able to get the money directly, we'll still play a role one way or the other.
Fantastic.
And I do think on the federal policy side, to Joyce's point, there's a lot of strings attached and initiatives that are embedded in those bills. The infrastructure bill, but especially the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think, you know, in the near future, I mean, we're going to see new sustainability metrics and environmental product declarations and all of these things that are going to impact specs and what we do with materials that we're not even ready for, right? But they're there. And if we want to use that money, that's what we got to do. And so I think over the next few years, you're going to see a pretty radical acceleration in a lot of that because of what goes along with some of those initiatives.
Okay, we'll take one more question. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, folks. My name is Reed Miller. I'm a new faculty here in civil environmental engineering, and climate has come up in a number of your comments so far. So I guess I was just curious how you folks are adapting given the rapid pace of impacts of climate change. You have to maintain existing infrastructure, plan for mitigation, plan for adaptation. How are we able to involve research to quickly deploy new technologies in order to confront this, ever-present crisis? Thank you so much.
So in Maine, I feel fortunate in that the governor established the Climate Council, and as part of that, there's a subcommittee that actually Dr. Jonathan Rubin is on, who's in the room, It's called the Science and Technical Committee. And what I really appreciated about the work they've done is it's very Maine centric, and they bring a lot of the research that has happened here in Maine into a document that I can use to predict, what size our culverts should be or how wide our bridges should be. Interesting to the question about how do you get people to like some of the technology and the specs, and how do you get people to do it? About 6 years ago, we changed our culvert sizing policy. And we did that with the idea that we believed that there were more storm events that were really dramatic. And we really didn't have the research behind it, and we couldn't get the research in time. And so we just made a decision. But I think it's really important to take a look at some of the storms we're getting, because I believe we're getting more frequent big storms, heavy events. And I think that it's something that I've recently said to a group of maintenance people from around the country: if you don't believe in climate change, that's okay, but you need to know that climate is changing. And it's not political, right? I mean, DOTs aren't known for being left of liberal, and we all believe in climate is changing. And I do think research is important. I think the work that technical committee has done has been fabulous.
So now I have two mics. So what happened to us is so similar to Joyce's. So we had our secretary is working with our governor, and they created a position, a climate chief position. This is a position that not only is focused on the bill and the new grant programs that are in it, like NEVI plan that everyone hears about and Protect, but it's also for us to kind of look outside of the box from what we were doing in the past. Historically, MassDOT does state of good repair kind of projects. These are definitely more modernization. And so for us, the research that we've been trying to do is working with our program managers, our planning groups, consultants where necessary, to kind of figure out how do you prioritize one location or over another? And it's not really as straightforward as maybe it was in the past. You could look at a bridge and say, it just got a 4. We have to prioritize this, but it's not really the same when you're doing modernization. So for us, we've been trying to really look at our mapping technology, our research, working within each of our districts to kind of figure out those priorities, not only to be effective in our grant applications for a lot of these areas, but also to be able to really tell a better story to our MPOs and our other regional planning groups as to why we're picking one project over another. And there is a lot of different aspects. They really are focusing in Massachusetts on decarbonization and EV, but obviously we're also very concerned with coastal resiliency, flooding. And I don't know if anyone heard, but there was a tornado touchdown in Massachusetts as well. So, I mean, I think this is it's an ongoing concern. And then, like I said, how do you say in Mattapoisett that it's more important for them to focus on coastal resiliency when they just had a tornado? So it is a balancing act, and that's where we need the research to kind of figure out where those needs are and to figure out how to prioritize where the money is going to go to do the replacement of these structures.
Well, thank you very much. You said you want to say?
So something we do at TRB is also convene. We hold a whole bunch of meetings throughout the year. We have our TRB annual meeting every January. We get about 15,000 people descending on DC, and I can tell you climate change is definitely one of those topics that's been talked about a lot in the last few years. But we also try and convene experts throughout the year as well through different conferences, and we try and introduce this topic not unilaterally, but obviously with the blessings of the folks behind the conferences. We also have tons of research. We try and put out webinars. We try and put out other materials out there to bring people up to speed in terms of what the latest thinking is on this particular topic. It's an ongoing thing for us. It'll continue to be an ongoing thing for us. And yeah, and hopefully, we can do something about it at some point. But
I guess from our perspective, it's both mitigation and adaptation. That's how we frame everything that we do, and it's a big priority in the department. Not just from mitigation, but if we have to operate in complex and changing hazards in the future that are going to impact logistics and gap crossings and things like that, we've got to be thinking about it. So we have to think about it from an operational perspective. On the mitigation side of the coin, that's a huge driver, at least from the administration of the DoD. I think if you look at emissions, the DoD in the US itself is like the 17th largest country in the world as far as emissions, and most of that comes from fuel, right? And I don't think we're going to be replacing all the fuel we use in aircraft and tanks and other, heavy artillery, whatnot, anytime soon. So how do we offset that? Are there circular economy considerations, the way we manage our lands and do terrestrial carbon sequestration? Are the things we can do from a mitigation perspective? A lot of that we're seeing in mitigation associated with our buildings and installations portfolio. That's about 30% of the emissions. So there's operational emissions associated with that we want to try to optimize. And there's already initiatives around electrification and passive design. I'm actually working on, we've got a couple $1 billion of net zero pilot projects for military construction going on right now. So there's an operational energy side of that. Then there's also an embodied carbon side of that. So that all comes into new materials, right? So there's mitigation and adaptation activities. The other thing I guess I'm seeing that also crosses to the civil world that is really revolutionizing, I think, new projects, but also how we operate existing projects is cross optimization for I don't know what you want to call it, cross-function performance. So we may have a lot of projects. This is going on right now in the south, in the west. A lot of projects built, decades ago for flood risk management, big reservoirs. If we're thinking about droughts or atmospheric rivers, you have these extreme weather whiplash types of events. Operating those on a water control manual that was developed 50 years ago is not the way to do it. And so can we use, climate informed forecasts to better operate those projects, not just for flood risk management, but also because we need to provide water out of the project, we need to provide hydropower out of the project, and we need to preserve an ecosystem that's changing with big swings in weather. So that's one of the things that's really changing the way even we do business, because we typically divide up funding by application. And we're seeing to optimally operate those projects, there's a whole bunch of applications that we have to optimize against, and it's a real struggle to understand where the value is, right? We want to save lives by flood, but we want to preserve that there's enough water so that that community can have water supply, right? So that's another thing that I see coming that's probably going to change the way we do business too.
Great, thank you. This was great questions and really great answers. We appreciate you all taking the time to come and be with us today. I know how busy you all are. Some of you have traveled longer than others, driven all the way from Washington, DC at 3 a.m. Did, right? We appreciate you doing that. And thank you so much. Just give our panelists a very strong hand.